O God, so speak through my words that your words may be heard, and being heard may be believed, and being believed may be lived. Amen. What do you do with the mad that you feel when you feel so mad you could bite? When the whole wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. If you know this song, as Barbie has pointed out in the chat, if you know this song, you might know it from Daniel Tiger, the PBS cartoon show, or you might know it from further back, like me and like Barbie. You might know it from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the show that introduced Daniel Tiger. I learned as a child a whole lot of things from Mr. Rogers. I learned about how crayons are made. I learned what x-rays were before I ever had to have one. I learned about friendship and make-believe and feeding fish and making mistakes. And I learned about anger. All throughout the show, I'd see puppets in the neighborhood of make-believe get angry and learn to express their anger. I'd hear Mr. Rogers talk about being angry, whether it was because we were hungry or had to wait or someone hurt us. It was so clear that just like all the other feelings, angry was just a way that people felt, even grown-up people. And so he'd sing with us, what do you do with the mad that you feel? What do you do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough? Do you round up friends for a game of tag or see how fast you go? My mom taught me about my anger too. I remember a conversation on the couch when I was maybe 8 years old. I don't remember what I was angry about. I just remember that I went up to my room to be angry and I hit some pillows or something. And then I came down and talked about it with my mom. And I told her how hard it was to know what I could do, what I was allowed to do with my anger. And I remember she said, you can hit whatever you want to in your own room or draw or yell or do whatever you need to do, as long as you don't hurt yourself or someone else, and as long as you're using your own things. And I said, except smash on my doll's head, thinking of the vintage dolls that I'd inherited from my aunts and grandmother and feeling like sometimes that was what I really actually wanted to do, to really go to town in a big way like that. And she said, well, yes, there are some things that you might be very sorry about later. And it's good to be thinking ahead like that about where you might want to stop so that you don't do things you didn't really want or mean to do that you'll be sad about later. And that was what Mr. Rogers had taught me too. It's great to be able to stop when you've planned a thing that's wrong and be able to do something else instead and think this song. Those were good lessons. They gave me resources that I needed. I learned that it was okay to feel angry. What mattered was what I did with the anger. And I learned that I had what I needed in me and around me to think and plan ahead for being angry, to have options set up for myself so that I didn't go too far and hurt myself or other people or the things that I cared about. Neither of them ever quoted the book of James to me. Be slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. I'm very glad they didn't. Be slow to anger would have felt like something totally beyond my control. I needed permission to feel the anger first and work through it from there. That permission and those skills served me well. I was lucky to get a healthy education in anger. And it was still years and years before I learned also that as well as they taught me to deal with anger, it was still with an underlying assumption of white US Protestant Midwestern cultural norms around anger. I was taught how to manage my anger as a good white Midwestern girl. Anger is universal. It's in all of us, regardless of who we are and where we come from, just like Mr. Rogers said. Anger is universal, but the boundaries around it, the expectations around what to do with it, those are not universal. And especially the experience of whether we are encouraged, discouraged, or downright punished for expressing anger is definitely not universal. On some level, I think I knew as a girl and young woman that my anger was not the same as the anger of the boys and men around me. But I'm sorry to say that for me as a white woman, I was in my 30s before I really began to understand the depth of the differences in how anger is treated deeply. And I'm certain there are ways that I miss it still, times that I miss it still. But it was the year of the Ferguson uprising that really changed things for me. That was the critical event for me that forced me to watch carefully, to form a personal response to the claims of the Black Lives Matter movement. There was nothing about the murder of Mike Brown that hadn't happened many times over in other places. It was the sustained expression of Black anger in my lifetime spilling into my sphere that forced me to pay attention in a new way. Watching the coverage of Black anger on the news from Michigan showed me what looked like people setting their own city on fire. But reading the accounts from friends in St. Louis who were there on the ground and seeing how different their view was from the view on CNN or wherever showed me something about how much the national media had invested in making Black anger look inherently violent and threatening. A veil of naivete dropped from my eyes as I saw for myself how many of the nice white people around me had trouble believing these eyewitness accounts, even from white sources they trusted, over what the national TV reports had framed. So in the 7 years since Mike Brown's murder, I've learned to ask a lot of questions about anger and how it is viewed and welcomed or unwelcomed, about my own anger and the anger of others around me, especially the anger of poor Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. I've had to learn to ask why so many people in our country, especially so many of us who are middle to upper class and white, have been encouraged to view expressions of Black, Brown, and Indigenous anger as quick overreaction. Why have we been conditioned to receive events like the Ferguson uprising or the protests of Indigenous water protectors along the Mississippi as sudden and violent, instead of seeing these events as having taken 400 years or more to come to this point? Talk about being slow to anger. If there is a lesson to be learned in this country about the value of being slow to anger, I've become convinced that it's going to be learned from communities of color, and that the value lies not in being slow enough that our anger doesn't make people uncomfortable, but in learning how to see injustice clearly and stand up to it without letting the anger eat us alive from the inside out. A couple of years ago, Black author and theologian Austin Channing Brown, whose book I'm Still Here, a group of us read this June, a couple of years ago, she hosted white social work researcher and author Brene Brown on her show, The Next Question, a show where she and two other hosts curate conversations that try to go a level deeper into matters of anti-racism and Black thriving. Now, normally in something like this, I would try to express respect for these two brilliant thinkers and writers by referring to them by last names or titles, but when both last names are Brown, that gets really tricky. So I'm going to relay this conversation using their first names for today so that we can be clear. Austin had asked Brene to talk a bit about what led her deep into racial justice work and what motivated her in it today. And so Brene shared a bit about her academic journey and mentors who had helped her with that. And then she stopped and she said, but I'm working on a new strategy now. And she sort of paused there. And she thought out loud a bit, and she acknowledged the toxicity that has come from white women using phrases like no hate, to shut down discomfort and anger and avoid confronting problems. But she said, I don't think hate and shame-filled activism is sustainable. And Austin responded, I think there are a lot of movement builders who would say the same thing. And I think they would add anger actually to that list. Brene said, I would add anger too. And Austin said, it can maybe be a catalyst, but for sustainability, and she just shook her head. And they go on to talk about how part of that is because of, as you look at the health outcomes for people of color, for women in perimenopause and menopause, and for the rage that comes with built up anger that doesn't find expression and resolution. How anger as the fuel for something burns us up as much as it brings us forward, even though it can be one of the best catalysts. So when I gather all that up in my arms and I come back to James and I sit down with James, it makes me wonder, what kind of anger was he responding to in his community? Was it the kind of anger that centers selfishness, that springs up when we're used to getting our way and suddenly we have to share? Is that why James says to be slow to anger? Or does James come from a place of a lot of righteous anger and the experience that anger itself is not enough? Anger can be holy, and anger can also be toxic. Anger in and of itself then is neither the problem nor the solution. So I'm wondering today, maybe we should hear this invitation as be intentional about how you engage and direct your anger. Watch your anger for what it produces. What comes out, as Jesus asks the Pharisees? Does your anger produce slander and folly? Does it produce hurtful action? Does it come out in ways that ask the wrong people or creatures to pay the price because you aren't dealing with the real cause? As for example, last night when I yelled at my cat for playing with puzzle pieces that I was the one to leave the lid off, when really I was frustrated with things that had nothing to do with the cat, who was just being a cat. Or does your anger produce action toward a more just world? Does your anger come from a place of love? And then lean into that anger. Let it set you on a path where you can be fueled for the long run by love, without having to lose the urgency and clarity that anger can give. Know that there's something deep inside that helps us become what we can. That was Mr. Rogers' hope for us as small children, and I believe it was a deeply biblical and faithful hope that we would learn to engage our anger, our deep anger, so that it would produce action that was consistent with God's way of love, that we would grow into mature people who could feel the full range of human emotion and not hide from the hard stuff like anger, but let it help us on our way to a fuller, deeper love. To befriend our anger, learn it. You might want to make dates with your anger, make plans to express it. Learn how your anger works, how it can propel you, and what other emotions and relationships you need to come alongside anger for that to be a sustainable force for good as a whole picture. As we move to our reflection slide, I wonder, and these are questions that you can answer in the chat in any order that you find answers to them that you might want to express. First of all, what do you do to express your anger in healthy ways, and what helps you to turn your anger into positive action? Walking is a big one for me now, for instance, to express my anger in healthy ways, especially if I can walk where my feet touch the earth. That helps ground me. And then what were you taught about whether your anger was holy or pleased God? And has your understanding of that changed over time? I shared a little bit about how I was taught to manage my anger. I don't know that it was a conversation I had until I was an adult about whether anger was holy or God-pleasing. So certainly my understanding of that has changed over time. And then what helps you to know when it's time to slow down your anger and when it's time to lean in and go full bore on it? Susan is offering that cleaning is a way that she expresses her anger in a healthy way. And certainly that can be a positive action. Rita says, create a rational discussion if the anger relates to another person. Yeah, that willingness to engage, if the anger is with another person, that willingness to engage the person we're actually angry with, and to do it in ways that are at least honest and are seeking to make room for our commitment as Good Samaritans to be open-minded followers of Jesus. To maybe we're not fully rational, we're not really created as perfectly rational beings, and but to at least try to engage fairly in that conversation. Cal and Vaughn say, figure out something good you can do in the direction for your anger. There's always one step, as good for adults as the children who hear these words. Do things that are safe and good for you, another, all others, and this world about which we are genuinely fond. I like that phrasing of fondness about the world. I think I'd not thought about it that way, but I think that can be one of the things that at least brings us back to our true selves and helps us explore that anger. Wendy says she counts her blessings to shift from anger or resentment. Barbie says, Brian and I are taking copious notes. Yes. Beth says, sometimes I do breath work, inhale, exhale, and other times I write or call my representative for District 4 and senators. Those are great ways of channeling anger into positive action. Yeah. Smashing tennis balls. Laura says, anger was loud and scary in our house, and I wasn't really taught about anger in a healthy way, so thanks for thinking about this. Singing, dancing, writing, hate writing in a journal so it isn't outside the pages in a notebook. That's a great one, yes, to have a place to write where it's not going to anywhere else, and therefore that anger can turn into whatever it turns into without hurting someone else. Screaming into a pillow at a computer screen, as long as it doesn't stay like screaming is the only thing we ever do, screaming itself can have a really beneficial physiological response for us to let us work through things. Yeah. I invite you to take these questions, continue to answer them in the chat, and particularly to take the second and third questions with you. I'll put them in the chat so that they are there to be scrolled back to if you so choose as we move through the rest of our service and into the affirmation of faith.